Okay, now that we have backed up our Pro Tools session, either by using the Save Copy In command and backed it up to an additional hard drive, or if we've backed it up using a third-party cloud application like Gobbler, we're ready to create our final mix. There are two ways that we can do this. One is called bouncing to tracks, and the second is called bouncing to disk. So we're going to look at bouncing to tracks first. Okay, so I've got a mix here in front of me. This is a project I've been working on. I'm ready to print the final mix. So let's look at this session. You can see here I've got all of my drums all the way up to here. And I've got those coming out bus 43 and 44, and they are going to a drum bus master. So there's the outputs, 43 and 44. They're going to the input on this track on the same bus. And so all of the drums are going through this track. So if I mute this track, you can see all the drums are muted. I've got tambourine, shakers, other things. Everything is assigned to the master bus. Okay, every single item is assigned in one way or another going to the master bus. So here is the master bus. And you can see I've got a variety of insert plugins on here as well. And then right now, everything is going to the master outputs. So if I mute the master output, it mutes all of the audio. To create a final mix then, using this process bouncing to tracks, then what I do is create an additional stereo track. I can rename this final mix. And what I want to do is have the outputs of my master go to the inputs of this track. So let's just go here and pick a bus that's not being used. 13, 14 is free, and I'll set this to 13 and 14. And record enable that track. Now I'm ready to record my final mix by bouncing to tracks. There are a few things that you need to consider before you bounce to tracks. One is that you have to make sure your inputs and outputs are set up properly like I've done here. So the outputs of all the tracks that you want to record need to go to the input of the track that you want to record to. Another thing to consider is that Pro Tools will only record onto that final track what it hears. So, for example, if I didn't want these two tracks muted, I would have to unmute them before I hit record. It's not going to record something that's muted. So it'll only bounce or play back the audible tracks. When you create a final mix, there's a couple of ways you can do this. If you just go to the beginning of your piece and start recording, Pro Tools will continue recording until you hit the spacebar to stop. Another way to do this is to just select all of the items that you want recorded. So you could go like this, select every single item, and it's going to create a timeline selection based on everything that you have selected. So then when you hit record, start recording where your selection starts, and it will stop recording where your selection ends. Once you have created your final mix is also time-stamped, so Pro Tools knows exactly where it's supposed to be. So you can see I've moved it here. If I want to go back and place it exactly where it was originally, I can just hit spot mode, hit original timestamp, click OK, and it moves it right back to where it was originally. So that's how you create a mix by using the process called bouncing to tracks. Bouncing to disk is similar to bouncing to tracks in that you're creating a final mix, in this case a stereo final mix from the tracks that you see in front of you. The difference is in how you do it. You don't create a new final mix track and assign all of the outputs of the tracks you want to record to go to the inputs of the final mix track. You don't create a final mix track. You're actually bouncing this mix inside of Pro Tools. So let's look at how you do that. First thing you do is make a selection, just like we did earlier. So I'm going to make a selection. The longest pieces are the ones I'm concerned with. I don't have to select every single track. I'm just making a selection that will stop and start at the correct location. As a matter of fact, what I usually do is give myself a little extra space at the end. So Shift, click, so that I make sure I have plenty of extra time for the reverbs and things like that to ring out before the recording stops. So now I've made my selection. Now I can come up here to the File menu and I can say Bounce to Disk, or use the shortcut Option Command B. Now let's look at this dialog box. This dialog box contains a number of different items that we need to look at specifically. So right now, when we bounce to disk, our bounce source is output 1 and 2. So we have to make sure that everything is routed to outputs 1 and 2. That's what's going to be listened to create our final bounce. So if we had changed it and we had a bus that we wanted to listen to, instead of outputs 1 and 2, we would change that here. Output 1 and 2 I know is what I want to listen to because I've made sure that the master bus here is set output 1 and 2. Okay, back to the bounce to disk dialog box, Option Command B. Here we can select the format that we want our final mix to be in. WAV, AIF, MP3. I'm using WAV files for my main session type, so I'm going to select that. But if we were just doing a demo mix and just wanted an MP3, we could just select MP3. Next, we choose the type of format. Almost always, I do a mix in interleaved. The reason for that is because the final format for an audio file almost always is a stereo interleaved file. It still contains two unique mono files, but they're woven together, so they just appear as one stereo file. So I'm going to choose interleaved. Your bit depth, you're going to choose based on what you're going to do with your file. If it's going to go on a CD and you're not going to have it mastered, then you would choose 16-bit, since you know that the format for a CD is 44.1 16-bit. I'm going to have this mastered, so I'm not going to reduce the bit depth. I'll let the mastering engineer do that. And the format here will remain the same, 44.1. Then all I do is hit bounce. And now it acts just like it did earlier when I bounced to tracks. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel since we don't want to wait the 2 minutes or so for that to occur. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bounce this out. I've made a really small selection so we don't have to wait for this entire mix to bounce. I'm going to call this Todd's Mix Bounce _1. I'm going to choose the destination where this is going. Let's just put it on the desktop so we can find it that way. So I'll click open and I'll hit bounce. Click OK for the MP3 types. Bouncing it down. Now let's go look for these files on our desktop. Okay, so that is our mix. We could listen to it if we wanted. Let's just go back into Pro Tools. Back into the bounce dialog box. And let's look at a couple of other things here. We can also choose what's called offline bounce. This is a new feature in Pro Tools that allows you to bounce your audio files faster than real time. So it's not actually going from point A to point B in real time and re-recording your mix. It's actually doing it all behind the scenes, and it does it as fast as your CPU resources will allow. So for example, if I select this whole mix we know it's going to be roughly 2.5 minutes. That's how long this piece is to bounce down. However, if I select bounce to disk and I choose offline bounce, it's going to be named Todd's Mix Bounce _2, and I hit bounce, get rid of the MP3. You can also share this bounced mix to a variety of sources. If you come down here to share, you'll see that you can share it with SoundCloud. So if you've created your own SoundCloud account, you can upload your mix directly to SoundCloud from the Bounce to Disk dialog box. Also, if you want to send this mix, for example, to a client, you could down or upload this file directly to Gobbler. In addition, you can also add this mix to your iTunes library. So there are a variety of options for you to choose from when bouncing to disk, either online or offline. I would recommend that you set up a SoundCloud account and or a free Gobbler account and try experimenting with this. This is very much the way that files nowadays are transferred, is either via Gobbler or by using the prior method that we discussed, save copy in.